The Dragon Age series has a long and storied history with loads of lore, wars, and Darkspawn invasions to cover. Given that it's been 10 years since the release of Dragon Age Inquisition, and with Dragon Age the Veilguard finally launching, we're going to cover the timeline of Thedas, from the founding of the Chantry all the way up to the Dreadwolf's latest misdeeds. This is the Dragon Age timeline explained. Now, before we start, given that there's hundreds of years of in-game lore, I've obviously had to focus on the things that are more relevant for the games. I'm sorry, but if I did the whole thing, we would be here forever, and simply no one has that kind of attention span anymore. Dragon Age games are set in the world of Thedas, which, fun fact, actually stands for the Dragon Age setting. I'm not joking, and now you'll never not notice it. The calendar I'm using for this timeline is the one that the Chantry, aka the Church, uses. Every 100 years since the founding of the Chantry is an age, and the Divine, the head of the Chantry, basically does a vibe check and names the upcoming age after that. The Dragon Age is the 9th age of Thedas, but we have a ways to go before we get there. Because we actually have to start with the Ancient Age, which was the time before the Chantry was founded. Just like with our Gregorian calendar, these years have a minus in front of them, and I suppose we have BC, before Common Era. Theirs is like before Chantry. A lot of big things happen in the Ancient Age, which spans thousands of years. Like I said, this is before the Chantry and their calendar. For example, you've got the rise and fall of the Elven civilization. Elves were the predominant race in Thedas, living in their glorious kingdom of Arlathan, and they've lived in a time where using magic was commonplace because the world hadn't been separated from the Fade, aka the realm of magic, by a magical barrier called the Veil. More on that later. These elves were immortal, and over time, one particular group of elves, the Evanuris, amassed enormous amounts of power. They were constantly vying and bickering amongst themselves for more power, referring to themselves as gods, and even going so far as to enslave their own people. Eventually, this was challenged by Fen-Harel, who has had numerous names: the Lord of Tricksters, the God of Betrayal and Rebellion, but you might know him better as Solus, your companion from Inquisition. He began to free slaves and created an army to fight back against the Evanuris, but they were too powerful. A turning point came when Mythal, the All-Mother of the Evanuris, voice of reason and Solus's dear friend, was murdered by the others. Solus used powerful magic to create the veil between the waking world and the Fade, and banished the Evanuris beyond it. However, in doing so, he paid a terrible price. The elves who relied on the magic of the Fade began to lose their immortality and diminish over time. Dwarves and humans also existed in the Ancient Age. The dwarves built the deep roads, and the humans started to build their foothold in Thedas with the Tevinter Imperium. As Tevinter expanded its territory, it came into contact with the elves, which turned bloody very quickly. Tevinter sank the once great city of Arlathan into the ground using blood magic, and took any survivors as slaves. A number of other things happened during this time, such as the First Blight. Now, a blight is a period of time where Darkspawn and archdemons attack the surface world, and this one lasted almost 200 years. It was caused by Tevinter mages who attempted to reach the Golden City in the Fade, basically the home of God, and the city didn't exactly like that, corrupting the mages and turning them into Darkspawn. The Blight was only put to an end when the Order of the Grey Wardens was founded to snuff out the draconic archdemon leading the Darkspawn army. Towards the end of this age, a key figure in Dragon Age lore is born and then betrayed: Andraste. Andraste was a prophet who taught the word of a god called the Maker, who she had visions of in her dreams. Andraste, previously a slave of the Tevinter Imperium, amassed an army with her husband, a warlord named Mafarath, and set their eyes on Tevinter, who still worshipped the heretical old gods. But Andraste was betrayed by her husband and killed before her armies could attack the Tevinter capital of Minrathous. Despite her death, her teachings still resonate, and an official religion is founded in her name. Now, the elves had joined this rebellion, warring against the nation that had enslaved them for hundreds of years. Even after Andraste's death and their defeat, they were given their own lands again by her husband and set off on the Long Walk, a miserable trek that cost many lives, to their new lands, which were called the Dales. One final big thing that happened in this age was the First Inquisition, a group formed to take down magical threats like heretics and abominations, but more on them later. The Divine Age kicks off with the Emperor of the human nation of Orlais appointing the first head of the Chantry, the Divine Justinia I. Now, it's not all fun and games and newly formed religions, though. A second blight hits Thedas, and while Orlais, the Grey Wardens, and the rest of Thedas team up to deal with the hordes of Darkspawn, the Tevinter Imperium abandons everyone else and decides to only defend itself. A bold move. With multiple victories against the Darkspawn claimed, Orlesian and the Chantry's influence grew, but there's the question of what to do with the mages. The Chantry needs their power to assist against the Darkspawn, but the mages also can't be allowed to run unchecked. In 120 Divine, the Inquisition and the Chantry sign the Navaran Accord. This agreement gives both factions a reason to unite under a common cause and has the bonus of giving the rapidly growing Chantry a military arm. The Circle of Magi and Templar Order are founded from the signing of this agreement, and some members of the Inquisition form the Seekers of Truth, basically a secret organization that keeps tabs on the Templars. The Circle of Magi keeps mages in check by providing strict training to stop them from becoming susceptible to demonic possession. The Templar Order is there to provide the muscle. They hunt down rebel mages who refuse to join the Circle, and any who have become possessed by demons. Meanwhile, the Blight is still ongoing, and it's not just the Tevinter Imperium who's sitting out the fight. The elves aren't helping either. Tevinter's plan to go to the Winchester, have a pint, and wait for everything to blow over didn't exactly work, as the Darkspawn attack the capital of Minrathous. Orlesian Emperor Drakon has a choice: expand his empire and take over Tevinter, or help the Grey Wardens at their headquarters of Weishaupt. Drakon chooses the Wardens, and as thanks, they all decide to join the Chantry, which continues its exponential growth throughout the age, which even reaches Tevinter. The Second Blight ends in 195 Divine, with the defeat of the Archdemon, and Thedas begins to rebuild. Human-elf relations are at an all-time low after the Blight as we go into the Glory Age, which leads to the Divine Renata I declaring a holy war between the two races, which is known as the Exalted March of the Dales. The elves make numerous victories, including invading Val Royeaux, capital of Orlais and home of the Chantry, but it doesn't take long for Orlais to turn the tide. The defeat of the elves is devastating for them. The Dales is annexed by the Orlesian Empire, and alienages are formed. Walled-off districts in major cities where elves are crammed in and forced to live in squalid conditions. Those who escape the Chantry's grasp become nomadic, and are referred to as the Dalish. Meanwhile in Thedas, various territories in the Free Marches unite and attempt to build a new empire, thanks to meddling from Tevinter. This is eventually quelled by another Exalted March. In 283 Glory, the Navaran Circle caused a disaster. Mages in its circle summoned a demon which escaped and killed dozens of people before it was eventually caught. The incident sparked the Divine to give certain people the right to grant the Rite of Annulment, where a Grand Cleric can purge an entire circle of Magi if they consider the group at risk. This will be important to remember later. Which brings us to the Towers Age, so named for the towers of the Grand Cathedral in Val Royeaux. The building, which is the grand seat of the Divine and the centre of the Andrastian faith, took 200 years to build and was finally finished, so you can see why the Divine would want to name an age after it. Another Blight hits, but this one is quelled relatively quickly, and by that I mean it only took about 15 years. The Grey Wardens, backed by the armies of Orlais and Tevinter, band together to take down the old god Toth and the Darkspawn armies in record time. This alliance between Tevinter and Orlais doesn't last though, and the Chantry comes to a disagreement over how to interpret the second commandment: magic must serve man and not rule over him. The Tevinter priests argue that mages should be allowed to rule and make an adjustment to their chant of light to reflect that. The Divine demands that they adhere to the Orlesian chant, and when they refuse, brands them heretics and casts them out. In response, the Tevinter priests launch their own Chantry and name a mage as leader, calling them the Black Divine. This age kicks off with the resurgence of werewolves in Thedas, which doesn't seem great. The Orlesian Chantry is understandably a bit miffed that Tevinter has spun off their own branch and calls for not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 exalted marches to bring them back under Orlesian control. These marches take a while and spill over into the next age. All 4 marches fail to take the Tevinter capital of Minrathous. It seems they've really beefed up on defences since the first Blight. Funnily enough, declaring war on the people you're trying to control 4 times over the course of a century isn't exactly going to endear them to you, and the divide between the 2 chantries deepens. The Orlesian Empire decides, hey, we're already at war, why not one more? And they try to invade the Ferelden Valley, which was the birthplace of Andraste. They figured they'd get away with it because all of the peoples there were occupied with infighting, but yeah, no, even that doesn't go to plan, and after a particularly harsh winter, the Orlesian troops retreat to lick their wounds. Given the ongoing Exalted marches, it should come as no surprise that this age is called the Exalted Age. The 4th and final march comes to an end when the capital of Antiva falls due to the old god Andoral being woken up, because that's right baby, it's time for a blight. Orlais and Tevinter aren't too eager to help out the rest of Thedas, so it's up to the Grey Wardens, led by an elf named Garahel, to unite whoever he can to put a stop to the Darkspawn. After numerous victories and countless casualties, Garahel sacrifices himself to kill the archdemon and end the blight. But victory comes at a cost for the Grey Wardens. The Griffins, their loyal and longtime companions, were all but wiped out in the fight. Meanwhile in Thedas, after hundreds of years of infighting amongst the Alamari tribes, the Kingdom of Ferelden is formally founded. Which brings us to the Steel Age, so named because in 599 Exalted, the Queen of Antiva was found with 4 steel swords impaled in her. The big event of this age involves the Canari, you know, those big grey guys who usually have the horns. They land in Par Vollen, which is Tevinter territory, and they quickly and quietly conquer it. They begin to take over other regions in the Tevinter Imperium, and then begin to extend their reach to Antiva, Rivain, and the Free Marches. Those who are conquered by the Canari are forcibly converted to the Qun, which is basically an all-in-one way of living, laws, philosophy, and even social architecture for the people who follow it. Eventually people started to rebel against the Canari, and their grasp on Thedas weakened a bit. The Storm Age is so named for the expected storm of violence, and boy were they right with that one. The age kicks off with a dispute over who should rule Ferelden, who finds itself without an heir. 2 cousins fight for the throne, and after one, Arland, takes it, his cousin Sophia decides to join the Grey Wardens instead. Arland turns out to be a horrible king, and Sophia tries to use the might of the Wardens to take the throne. Her coup doesn't work, and the Wardens are banned from Ferelden. For a place where horrific demons invade every 100 years or so, this feels like a terrible plan, but what do I know? After years of fighting, things come to a standstill between humans and the Canari. Both chantries call for exalted marches to push back the Canari. The first was a success, but the second fared terribly, with the Canari getting a foothold in Antiva. By the end of the 3rd march, the Canari are down to only 1 stronghold on the whole continent, and they realize they've been defeated. Peace talks between the Canari and the peoples of Thedas lead to the Lomerin Accord being signed by all but Tevinter, who are still very bitter. Which brings us to the Blessed Age, so named because the Emperor and his wife had twin boys, and it also marked the end of the war with the Canari. The city of Kirkwall, which was the setting of Dragon Age 2, rebels against Orlais and becomes a free city. The new Emperor of Orlais invades Ferelden, eventually sacking and occupying its capital city, Denerim. Amidst the chaos, Ferelden rebels begin their work to take back control of the country, with King Marek and Loghain Mac Tyr leading the Ferelden army to eventual victory against Orlais. Now we're on to the good stuff, the Dragon Age, so named for the assumed extinct dragon sightings all around Thedas. After defeating a Darkspawn known as the Architect, the Grey Wardens are allowed to return to Ferelden after their exile, which is great timing because in 930 Dragon, aka when Dragon Age Origins starts, the 5th Blight begins. The Battle of Ostegard takes place in 930 Dragon, and it's a disaster. The Ferelden king asks Orlais for reinforcements, which is an unpopular move given their recent war. Loghain's lack of faith in the king and his plot leads him to abandoning the king during battle, and he blames his treachery on the Grey Wardens. Both the Ferelden army and the Grey Wardens are defeated, and the Ferelden king and Grey Warden commander are killed. Loghain blames the king's death on the Wardens, declares himself in charge, which sparks a civil war in the region. However, the Blight and the Civil War didn't really take that long to solve because you, aka a newly anointed Grey Warden, are in charge of pulling together a ragtag group of scoundrels to save the day, which you do in 931 Dragon. The usurper is defeated, armies are united, the archdemon vanquished, and you become the hero of Ferelden. Or you die. It depends on what choices you make. On to Dragon Age 2 then, where we're introduced to Hawke, who is fleeing Darkspawn with their family in 930 Dragon. After becoming a business partner to one Varric Tethras, Hawke finds riches in an expedition to the Deep Roads and grows in status in the city of Kirkwall, eventually being asked to intervene with the Qunari, who are refusing to leave until they get their missing religious scripture back. Hawke solves the problem with the Arashok and becomes the champion of Kirkwall. However, tensions are rising in the city between the Templars and the Mages, and Hawke's companion, the mage Anders, blows up the Kirkwall Chantry. This leads to Knight Commander Meredith to order the Rite of Annulment, remember that old thing, allowing the Templars to kill every mage they can find. Hawke can either choose to stand with the Mages or the Templars in the final fight. In Dragon Age 2's DLC Legacy, Hawke unwittingly awakens Corypheus, who will become the big bad for the next game, Inquisition. Remember the first blight caused by those Tevinter mages who tried to invade the Golden City? Well, it turns out that Corypheus was one of them. By 940 Dragon, everything has gone to hell. The Orlesian Civil War begins, and the events of what happened in Kirkwall sparks a Thedas-wide mage rebellion. Even the Templars are no longer under Chantry control, and the Seekers of Truth go out alone. The Navaran Accord is truly broken. 941 Dragon sees the explosive start of Dragon Age Inquisition as Divine Justinia V is killed at peace talks between the Templars and the Mages. The only survivor is, hey, you again, and it's discovered that you have a new power that can close the rifts that are appearing all over Thedas. These rifts are tears in the veil that separates the world from the Fade, and the small ones are relatively manageable, but there is a big old one in the sky called the Breach that might cause the end of the world if it's not accounted for. Who made the Breach? Well, that's none other than Hawke's old pal Corypheus. But with the world leaders at odds with one another, there needs to be some force dedicated to taking down Corypheus and sealing the Breach. Enter the Inquisition, which you end up in charge of. Through hard work and making alliances, you quell the civil war, help the people of Thedas, and destroy Corypheus and his armies. All done, right? No, we have the very important Trespasser DLC to get to. You see, a key ally of yours throughout Inquisition was Solus, an elf mage who happens to vanish without a trace after the final battle. After Corypheus' defeat, the nations gathered to determine what should become of the Inquisition, and it's discovered that Solus, your beloved companion, was actually the ancient god Fen-Harel all along, and plans to restore the elves to their former glory by tearing down the veil. The Inquisition may or may not continue to exist, depending on your choices, but no matter, because everyone decides to go after Solus. Which leads us into Dragon Age the Veilguard, which kicks off, again rather explosively, with Solus's ritual to bring down the veil. That was a lot, thank you for sticking with me. Like I said, there was plenty of lore I didn't even get the chance to speak about, and now with Veilguard there's going to be so much more to talk about. But for more Dragon Age, make sure to subscribe to GameSpot.